Get ready for real and raw discussions as we dive into
navigating mixed-race relationships and motherhood,
to the intersections of our lives,
money, and so much more.
All right. Welcome back to the Blindian Brown Girls.
Thanks for hanging with us.
Yeah.
What's your take on saying no to things? Like, are you someone that has a hard time turning down invitations, opportunities, things, people? I feel like, it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, or I hear a lot of people struggle with. A lot of my clients have this issue. It's like definitely one of the things that I find very, very frequently. And I don't know if that's because most of my clients are people of color. So I don't know if that's something, and I'm saying on the women's side. So I'm saying on the women's side, not on the men's side. Let's not get it twisted. Like on the women's side, women of color, I would say probably 90% of my clients have this issue.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's women of color only. I think that this is a global thing that applies to many, many women.
Yeah.
Which is a problem saying no. And what's interesting is, so to answer your question, sort of is the truth. Like I sometimes have a problem saying no, and then sometimes I'm like dead ass clear. The things that I find harder to say no to are when I am being sold something that is going to help my business in some way, and I've gotten on a call with them. It's over. Like, I am the worst person to be on a call
I
with.
want all my clients to be like you, all my consultations to be you.
Yeah, if you can like use me as I'd be like, yeah, okay. And like I got in trouble with this because just last week, my writer, is not really a ghostwriter, but there's like a team of people that I'm working with to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy is always trying to sell me something, like trying to upsell me on something.
Okay.
And I'm like, dude, no means no, right? And I like multiple times was like, no.
That's super annoying.
And he just kept pushing back. And you could see like it's a tactic, right? Like I can stand back and be like, you can't pull this shit on me. So I was like, fine, send me your contract and I'll take a look at it. He said, okay, so I'll send you the contract and then you can sign off and we'll process the payment at 6 p.m. today. Like really specific, right? And I was like, well, send me the contract. So at no point did I say, yes, I agree to your proposal.
Yeah.
He sends me the contract. I'm like, this is a fuck no. Right? Like, absolutely not. Because even though it sounds like a good idea, I don't have trust that they're going to deliver on this thing that they're promising me. So there's a lack of trust. I message him that. I'm like, this is a no. I'm sorry. No thanks. And I get a phone call and a phone call and a phone call. Like he wouldn't stop calling me.
What? To say what?
And then he gets upset with me because he's like, you agreed to sign the contract and pay. What? And I was like,
dude, who is this guy?
Did I agree?
Why are we working with him? Exactly.
Their whole, like, I feel like this company, their whole thing is like you get people in and then you try to like upsell them into all these other things. He's probably making some sort of commission. He's like, so now I have to like tell my financial team that you're not doing it and I'm going to have to pay for this and blah, blah.
Why did you tell them I was doing it when I didn't say I was doing it?
At what point did you get a yes out of me saying no multiple times, saying, fine, send me the contract as a way to literally get off the phone? Because at that point, I was like, this has been 40 minutes. I need to just be done.
This is crazy.
So, yes.
So you were able to say no in that situation.
I hung up and there was another 40 minutes of him like, you can't say no because you already agreed. And do you want me to play back the recording? I was like, no, I don't need the recording because I didn't sign shit. If I didn't sign shit, I'm not paying your shit. Like, at no point are you going to guilt me into anything.
That's ridiculous.
Anytime you were like way out of line, I'm sorry, that's a fuck no. But
That's why people don't like to be sold to, man. It's people like that who like ruin it for everybody. Yes, that's awful. That's terrible. But like
a terrible experience.
outside of that, where you wanted to say no and felt very happy saying no.
Often I feel with business things, I feel like it's a FOMO, right? Like, oh, I want to, like, this sounds really good and I want to do it. And like, it's an investment in my business. It'll grow the business. There's all kinds of things that those are usually the ones that I'm like, man, how do I say no to this? Do I want to say no to this? And like, I can see that there is like a I made some bad business decisions last year or 2 years ago that I'm still feeling the trickle of. I'm still like, "Ugh, another thing. Do I really wanna say no? Do I wanna say yes? Do I trust my intuition for this thing?" Which was my usual way of making a decision is intuition. So, if I can no longer rely on my intuition
Then
'cause I
what
feel
are the
like
metrics that were, yeah.
because I feel like I made some bad decisions out of intuition even.
Yeah, that's rough when you can't, like, when you second guess yourself.
Yeah.
But that, I think that's like an epidemic for women, right? Second guessing ourselves, doubting our own choices, right? And I wonder, okay, so again, I'm going to bring up the cultural part because, like, I can't not. For, I think a lot of us culturally, we are kind of conditioned that way
We're conditioned to not say no.
to not to say no and to not trust ourselves. Like, there's not like, I don't really remember being taught to trust myself. I don't know where I got that skill from. I think I got lucky in early in my life of doing work on myself and learned that.
Same.
Yeah, but I don't think
I
that
feel like that's not a cultural.
no, because I meet a lot of women in their 40s who are still struggling with self-trust and with confidence around choices and not needing approval or validation from external sources, whatever it is, whether it's a parent,
Partner.
a partner, a friend, some resource of some sort, or even sometimes it's like more education, more education, more education, because I don't trust myself. I don't trust my own knowledge, right? So it shows up in a lot of different ways, and I certainly see it for women of color. I think, you know, it's a, like you said, it afflicts all women. Do men have this problem too?
I don't think that it is the same for men. I think that men are conditioned and taught to more easily say no. And I wonder if that starts in childhood, where if, like, are we treating young boys and girls differently? When a girl says no, is a parent or a teacher more likely to coerce or question it? Versus if a boy says no, like, at least for my child, he's gonna double down on that no. Right? He's gonna be like, "Absolutely not. I will not be forced into this." And he's already showing that tendency. So, I can't imagine that there are gonna be teachers that are gonna be likely to coerce him into anything, or people, or friends, or whoever.
Okay. So
But
if the teacher is not coercing him because he's a boy, because to me that's a personality thing.
Yeah.
That's not a boy girl thing, right? Like the tendency to be that way, right? How it's then conditioned and handled is different, right? Because then we start to get conditioned accordingly. So if I'm a little boy who is very sort of adamant about my nose and, you know, very stern and strong, and maybe like I act a certain way when I'm saying no, and I'm a teacher and I don't want to deal with it. If I have a little girl who's exactly the same, right? Because there are little girls who are exactly the same. Am I doing something different with her? Am I trying to soften her up from her no? Am I trying to massage her out of her stance? Versus a boy who I'm like, well, boys will be boys. Like, I don't know. Is that happening? Because it has to start somewhere. However, I have male clients who are South Asian who struggle with saying no.
So South Asian and Asian,
And yes, and Asian.
like I guess Pan Asian, is that
East Asian.
right word?
Yeah. Pan Asian. Yeah.
They often are is it like I feel like they have less of a backbone, and I don't know what that is, but
Okay.
and it's a gross generalization, like, this is not true for every South Asian male, but I feel like they are conditioned, either by society, culture, their parents, whoever, to have less, of, like, a, "This is"
Strong position.
yeah. Like, "This is who I am, this is what I'm about," and I said no to that thing.
Yeah. I think that culturally, that's not a thing in general, maybe because all of the cultures that we just talked about are collectivist in nature. And it is very much about the whole and the group and like making sure everybody is good and not just like the individual. So maybe part of it is that. But then I think about, okay, there are right now more Indian male CEOs in this country than any other ethnic group, right?
Yeah.
Person of color ethnic group, right? Talk to me about that. Like, how do like are they
They're not the
they're
majority.
not the majority, and I wonder, are they that way in their work environment, but not that way in other parts of their lives? Because what I do see in a lot of my male clients who have a hard time with no, it's no around their parents and family.
Yeah.
It's no around um,
As in
particular
they
things
can't say no?
that they can't say no. They feel
Exactly,
obligation.
yeah.
They feel, yeah, like obligation. So, and I will say it comes up around money things where there's a show of money in some sort where it's like, I need to show my status by saying yes to this thing, or I need to show my ability by saying yes to this thing. So it's about like competition in some cases and then family. That's the two places I will say I see it the most.
Interesting. So, a South Asian male, you would consider more likely to not be able to say no if it it was a sales like a car salesperson that was like, "You shouldn't buy the Toyota, you should buy a Cadillac." I was gonna choose Tesla, and then I was like, "That's a no-brainer." Like, every South Asian male is gonna choose Tesla, so let's play
I wonder who drives a Tesla. Okay, if I'm really real about what my perception is, and this is my perception, this is my personal opinion, not judging anybody or putting my opinion on everybody, but my personal assertion on that is that South Asian and East Asian men have a particular standard when it comes to external things, so cars, homes, the look of things. So I don't actually think that they uh, can't say no. I think they are more decisive about things, about those types of things. I think where they fall down is when it comes to emotional exchanges, vulnerabilities, um, places where they can't use those things to assert their worth.
Mhm.
Family, right? You like, yes, you can assert your value in some way with family. They respond to you because you're successful, quote unquote, but you're still the son and you still have obligations and you still have
Right.
responsibilities. So I think it gets very messy in those places. And then when it comes to things like saying no to, I don't know, maybe participating in something that will show their status or show their, that they don't really want to do, but they feel that they have to.
Mm.
Things like that.
So I think that there might be a theory around this,
Okay.
which is that um, the shows of status or money are essentially the peacocking
Yeah.
of modern society. That's a quote from someone that we can put. I don't remember his name. Yuval, maybe. I don't know. So there is this idea that what we can show off in our modern society, males are going to be more likely to be driven towards showing off those types of things in general, right? Men don't buy Ferraris. I mean, women don't buy Ferraris, right? Like, women could give two shits about like, "Oh, I have the red hot drop top,"
Yeah.
there are
She
some
wants
women
to
that
ride in it, but yeah,
she would probably prefer to ride in it than to have
then go buy it.
one. Yeah. So, that's a very male peacocking behavior that is evolutionarily, like, who we are to a certain extent.
Mhm.
So, I think that it's probably not just South Asian men, but men in general are going to be more likely to say yes to the things that will
Show that.
show.
But I think that then if we're looking at other men who are not South Asian, men from collectivist cultures, I think they don't struggle as much saying no in general. So I think that's the difference, is that I think that they're also able to assert themselves in other areas, arenas, parts of their lives in a similar way.
Yeah.
Because I do believe that there is a particular conditioning that happens around like guilt and shame around saying no. Or I mean, there are particular cultures that are known for people pleasing, right? Like that are known for caring. I mean, we know our culture, in particular South Asian culture, we're always saying like everybody's thing is what will other people think, right?
Right.
And a lot of the times you're making decisions based on what other people will think. So even if you want to say no, you over here like, yeah, but what everybody else gonna think? So now I got to say yes, right? And then if I don't, there's guilt around it. I'm shamed. I'm pressured by other people. I'm ostracized. There's consequence. So it almost feels like it's easier to say yes, I guess, in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I think that sometimes the men who, at least in the small sample set that I know personally, deeply, I would say that the ones who have more confidence are going to be the ones that are likely to use their own inner sense as a compass for yes or no versus those that have lower levels of confidence. They're going to be more easily influenced.
For sure. I think that is women too. I think
And
women.
and I think that inherently as a gender, then women are generally less confident.
For sure.
There's going to be grades, but they're like if women are generally less confident than men, we see this in all kinds of places where they're not asking for the raise, they're not pushing for what they need, et cetera, et cetera. Like it shows up in so many ways. But I think that then inherently in children, we are more likely to like call a young girl who has a sense of herself and is confident and presents that way to the world, she is more likely to be called names like, oh, she bossy, right? Or
She's a bitch.
yeah, like by the time you're a teenager, that's definitely
At 8, she's a bitch. Yeah, don't get it twisted. They're saying stuff like that out here, like,
yeah.
and yeah, you're right. I think, I think that is shifting a little bit. I think little girls are able to, show up very differently than what was considered acceptable or um, just feminine once upon a time, right? Like there was a certain quality of confidence that wasn't associated with femininity, right? It was like the feminine was to be quiet and to be sort of in the corner and to be like,
say yes to everything.
yeah, and to be seen and not really heard so much and, not to have too loud an opinion. And, that was once upon a time the expectation for us, right? So I think there's an evolution that we've had to go through also to like move ourselves out of that place as women. I think there's always been women who have been vocal and loud, and how can there not have been? We are who we are, right? Women have personality and character just like men do, but we've been taught to quiet it down and make it smaller. And so, I think that is shifting, but I think that the response to it isn't shifting as fast. Like in that people are self-serving, right? So they don't like to hear no. And if a woman is very confident and is able to assert a no very directly, it feels stinging, I think, to some people. And it feels very like it feels different than hearing it from a man, I think, in a lot of cases. And you know, I think women don't like that response sometimes, right? They don't like the response that they're going to get if they say no, because they know it's not going to just be like an okay, cool. You know what I mean? And I think there's also an element of women like to be part of a group too. And sometimes there's a belonging element with saying yes, or overextending yourself and trying to do it all. But I also think that we live in a society that kind of expects us to do it all. So it's hard to say no.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of things do you feel like what are the most difficult things for you to say no to?
Doing too much. I find it really hard to ask for help. Very difficult to ask for help. But that's kind of a reverse problem, right? So like I am so self-sufficient that I'll say yes to too much. So I'll take too much onto my plate in the sense that like, and then I don't like to ask for help. So, but I won't overextend myself when it comes to giving my energy, like socially and things like that. I'm very okay with saying no to things. I've become very okay. Once upon a time, not at all. Not at all, right? But that was FOMO more than anything.
Same. I feel like that's the same for me. Like it's anytime that I've like felt intuitively like I shouldn't go to that thing, but then the desire to go outweighs that is usually like, oh, but I'm gonna miss out on something.
Yeah, and like and you know, how many times have you gone out where you're like, "Oh, I'm so glad I came. Like I almost didn't come and I'm glad that I came," right? Because you really had a good time or it was just like a dope experience or whatever. So I also take that into consideration sometimes where I'm like, you know, if I go, I'll probably have a good time. But I will say there's been times that I've, you know, kind of forced myself to go do a thing and I'm standing there like, why the fuck am I here? Like, what am I doing here? Well, like, I would so much rather be at home right now. So I think I've just become better at understanding when my body and my mind and my energy and my spirit need to like hibernate and just get that time. But I also build that into my life so that I don't overextend myself to some extent. But that's a practice. I think that you just kind of learn that over time. I have never had a hard time saying no to people about things. Like if I don't believe in something or if I don't want to do something, I don't have a hard time saying no to that. If it's like a sales thing, I'll feel uncomfortable as shit. I will feel like I will struggle in my mind, right? And it will be a conflict and I'll feel bad after. I'll feel all the things. I will still say the no though. I will have all the feelings around it. I'll feel guilty. I'll feel bad. Oh, you could have said yes, or you should have said it like this, or you like, had you said it like this, it would have like, I will analyze the no. So I will get in my head about the no.
I don't think men spend nearly as much time second guessing themselves.
No, absolutely not. I don't say yes nearly as much to things that I don't want to say yes to as maybe I did once upon a time. And I think a lot of it is personality. Like, you know, you're talking about Avery being how he is now. And I think you and I have both kind of talked about who we were as young girls. I was strong willed. So I wasn't really, I struggled through my strong will. Like it was a struggle to assert my strong will. But like I had to say no a lot in order to assert it. And that was the struggle, is fighting through the judgment and fighting through um,
The response.
response of the no's. Um, but I did it. And that's how I managed to, get my parents to understand about interracial relationships at 16 and how I went to fashion school without telling anybody and how I did a lot of the things that I did and moved to New York without telling anybody. Like I did I also didn't ask for a lot of opinions because I knew that I didn't want to have to appease other people. Yeah. So, I think there's ways that you can kind of manage it, but you got to be fucking strong. Like it's not easy.
It's not. It's not easy. And I feel like for women, especially towards other women, like we certainly don't make it easy, right? It's like it's hard to say no. You feel guilt around it. You feel some level of shame around it. Um, so I think that as women, we can certainly just have more grace for each other around, like, oh, it's not personal. It's just not doable, or they don't want to. And that's okay
Yeah,
too.
yeah. I think it's just becoming okay with also hearing no is important, and then reminding yourself that sometimes it's a no for you as well. So it's okay if it's a no for somebody else. I think a lot of times when you're invested in something, you want other people to be as invested as you or as excited as you or want it as much as you. And that's just not the truth about things, right? Like that's just because you want it or you want it to be this way doesn't mean that somebody else does. And I think just being more open to that variety is important. Like, and just being able to like not make a person feel bad because they said no, right? I think, that we're talking about it on a mild level. This moves all the way up the ladder to emotional manipulation and narcissism, where it becomes like, there's consequence for saying no, right? Like there's true consequence, and people become fearful of saying no to certain things or because there's such extreme consequence. And I see that definitely in some of my clients where there's so much conditionality around saying yes or no, meaning I'll take this away from you if you don't say yes, or if you don't say no, I will no longer give you this thing that I promised you, right? So it's like you learn to appease the people for the it's like transactional, right? But it's also so conditional. So how do you ever develop self-confidence and self-trust and trust of other people when that's constantly being done to you? It's tricky. It's really, really tricky. And it's like pervasive in certain cultures and communities and families, right? Where there's very much a like, if you don't study this, I'm not going to pay for your school.
Oh,
Right?
that's what you mean.
Yeah, like things
Yeah, I
like
had
that.
that happen.
Yeah, so things like that. Or, if you're choosing to marry that person, I'm no longer going to support you, pay for your wedding, whatever it is, right? Like
Right.
things like that, where it's like your choice is questioned all the time. So where do you develop the trust to believe in your carving your own path?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's tricky, especially with parents. I find that to be really tricky. Um, I definitely experienced that around school. I had considered changing my major to psychology early on in my undergrad, and my parents were literally like, "Absolutely not. We will disown you."
Really? Can we pause there real quick and just explore that just for a moment? Because I didn't know this about medicine versus psychology, and maybe that's not even what you're talking about.
No, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, because like please for a moment, let's take a pause and break it down for me because I have heard this from so many different people. We're like, yes. I have about 4 clients who are psychologists, which is
Yeah.
interesting, right? Whose all their parents were mad and upset that they were pursuing psychology because it wasn't medicine. And I was like, isn't psychology medicine? Like,
In the South Asian community, it is not.
what?
There is so much stigma still to this day around psychologists.
What? I did not know that. I thought, oh well, it, you're still a doctor. Like, I mean, like, you a doctor too. So
Well,
what's the problem?
if you go all the way through as
Do your
a
PhD,
psychiatrist, then you're a doctor.
or if you
But
do your PhD in psychology.
or PhD in
Yeah.
psychology,
Yeah.
then you're
Meaning
a
you're a
doctor.
specialized. I get it. I get it.
But there is so much yeah, just stigma. Like
Why? Because it's mental health, because it's your brain and your mind,
it's mental health,
and because it's not your body?
I guess.
Oh my goodness. I did not know that. I didn't know that. I don't know. I grew up like I'm about to be 44, guys, and I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that has been true
What are
in
you telling me?
not just my life, but so many other people have had the same experience. And definitely, maybe not now, like not in our generation, but our parents' generation all probably had that. Like, you don't go to a psychologist. If you go to a psychologist, something's wrong with you. Why would anyone go? Like, just all kinds of stuff around it.
Okay, well, we're gonna definitely have to do another episode on exploring this and mental health because I truly didn't know that. But yeah, so I mean, I have a client who, because she chose to study psychology, her parents actually stopped paying for her education. And she was like considering dropping out and going back to medicine because,
Just because of that.
yes, just because of that. And so we had, this was years before I met her, but yeah, that was her story.
So my parents were like threatening to disown me. They were dead ass serious about it. They're like, this is not happening. And I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Right? Like I'm a do my own thing person. So I was like, whatever. How will you know what classes I'm taking?
Yeah, exactly, right.
So I went and started taking a bunch of psychology classes. And then my other interest was religion. So I took a bunch of religion classes. So I basically had 3 tracks, and I was doing biology, psychology, and religion with the intention that with my parents thinking I was going to medical school,
Right.
me just being like, the more I learn, the more I'm like, I don't understand how these 3 are not interrelated,
Right,
which
exactly.
is how I
They
ended up in the field that I ended up
Oh,
in.
look at that, yeah.
Yeah. So I would literally go to and I had equal credits and all, so theoretically, I could have if I had fulfilled some exams, I could have graduated with 3 diplomas in
In
every
each
single
one,
one.
that's dope.
But I would go to my professors and be like, "So, how do we integrate body, mind, spirit?" And they were like, "Yeah, that's not a thing. Move to California, hippie."
Yeah, you're like, "Okay."
Yeah. Thank you very much. Uh,
Wow, and okay, I mean, listen, I get it because we're not talking about yesterday, so we're talking about some years ago, and it's really recent that people started connecting all of these things and, talking about it holistically and understanding the connection. I mean, people have understood it and known about it for centuries and millennia, really.
right. It hasn't been.
But it hasn't been popular or put in practice on I guess, on a public scale, on a mass scale, in a and when the West doesn't embrace it's not often until the West embraces something that people accept it, right? As being, oh, it must be real now, you know what I mean? Because
Right.
they grow in neem in California, all of a sudden now it's like, oh, okay, like,
There's a yeah,
I
yeah,
know.
yeah, of course.
I'm like, of course you do. Like, but like it's not until people do a thing like that where it's then okay, we went on off on a total tangent, but like that's one of those things where I just see the conditionality and it. Okay, so even if it starts there, where it's like, okay, I'm in college, I'm studying something, and my family is telling me they're not going to pay for it unless I continue this thing or finish this thing. All right, cool. That seems like a one-off, but that literally starts to translate and come with you, that second guessing that I need to check in with somebody or I need to pursue or satisfy somebody else's vision for myself. That comes with you. And that starts to, that can start to influence how you say yes and no to other things as well. Like
Absolutely.
you know, and again, if you generally, and again, this is a very general statement, but like generally, if you are strong enough to fight back as you were, or do your own thing and find your own pathway forward, then maybe the guilt and stuff isn't as pronounced as if you're someone who has a really hard time breaking away from that, dictatorial kind of like
Yeah,
place,
like this is our stance on it.
Yeah.
But I'm curious just to play the other side, like their children do need boundaries and they do need some level of guidance, right? And like I have some interesting conversations with Avery because he was in the car the other day, like, Mom, I'm not going to college. What happens if I don't go to college?
at 6.
And, um, and I was like, "Well, that's an option, and that would maybe mean that you're gonna have a job and you can be out of the house." And he's like, "No, but I wanna live with you, and I don't wanna go to college." And I'm like, well, we'll get there when we get there." But in my mind, I'm thinking, like, "If you're not going to college, you gonna be out of the house." And he's like, "So, if I go to college, and where do I live?" And I was like, "Well, usually on campus."
At college.
And he's like, "No, but I wanna live with you." And I was
Give him 5 more years, see if he still says that.
it's not gonna stick.
Right. Unless he's my son who's like, "I'm gonna live with you forever, mom, and nobody else." I'm like, "Get away from me. Give me my space. Why you on me?"
Yes, Avery is a little bit like that. So, we'll see how he develops, but it's interesting because to already be having that conversation, and am I repeating the same cycle if I say, "Well, if you're not going to college, you're not staying in this house. Like, there's no reason for you to be in this
The
house."
same cycle, you're still giving him choice, right? It's what he does with the choices. Like, I think the choice part is what's missing in a lot of the conditionality, right? There's lack of choice. So it's not like you're giving him the choice of not going, and then you're saying, but there is a condition around. Yeah, there's a consequence or there's a responsibility then that you're gonna have to pick up in order because listen, you might change your mind in that he goes and gets a job, it's a great job, and you're like, "Okay, well, you can stay here because you're being responsible, and I see you pursuing something, and I see you doing this something the same way that you would have done if you were in college pursuing something, doing something," right? That might change, and it might not be just because 'cause you're not in college doesn't mean you gotta go. I think you mean, like, you can't just be hanging out here, hanging out, like, you know what I mean? Why you not in college and you don't have a job? Yeah, now we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Ain't no child of mine doing any of that, right? Like they're not doing that, but I think that still is choice, right? Like even I had a conversation with Asaya the other day because I'm really curious as to like when his liking of girls and stuff is going to pick up because he's still very kind of like innocent and disinterested when it comes to those things. And I want to always have conversations with him, making sure that he knows he has choice and that anything will be accepted in our home, right? And so we ask him all the time, is there a boy you like? Is there a girl? Like we'll just throw it out there, right? And no, and we're not like actually being funny about it. We're literally being like, we're throwing this out. Take what you can get, right? And like, let's see what you respond to because I want him to know that he has choice. I tell him all the time, you don't have to go to college. That's a choice, right? If you want to pursue what it is that you want to pursue, he wants to be a wildlife biologist, you are going to have to go to
To
college,
go to
right? You
college
got to
for
go to
that.
college, right? And he's very clear on which colleges offer what he wants. So, but the option is there. We just recently started talking about he's starting to get into photography. He loves to draw. He's very much an artist. His dad bought him a camera. Thank you, Dad. That's the only one thing he ever bought him. But anyway, uh, a Polaroid at that, not a real camera. But anyway, it just to get him started. And he went to photography camp this summer, and I was like, listen, that's an option too. He loves watching those documentaries on life and planet Earth and all of those. And I'm like, why not? That could be you too, right? And so I feel like those are I always try to expand as much as possible and give as many possibilities as possible because I don't feel like I was given that. I wasn't that limited, I will say. I used to say I wanted to be a doctor, and my dad was like, "No, you absolutely don't." Like, "No, you don't. Stop saying that." I'm like, there is no other Indian dad in the world who is like telling his daughter that she does not want to be a doctor. Like he knew that wasn't like my thing, right? So I think I was saying that because I thought that's what I was supposed to say. And then he was like, "No, you actually don't." He's like, "You want to go to school till you're 35?" He's like, and he has a great amount of respect for doctors. And he's somebody who actually is very moved by people's titles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that he did not assign that to me at all. I was given choice, but it was still limited and it was still within very particular parameters and it was what was safe. I really try to give my kids more than that. But yes, then the question comes into play, like, what are the non-negotiables? What are the boundaries that are absolute? What are the, you know, consequences then of, making certain choices? Because I think you have to build that in too, right? So I think that that part is important, but I think not giving kids choice and not giving them the opportunity to make mistakes, which is, I think, a thing a lot of parents try to prevent their kids from doing these days, that also limits their ability to self-trust. That limits their ability to know when to say yes and no, or what they really want, or who they really are. So I think a lot of that starts in childhood. Like, I really think that a lot of what we end up overcompensating for later on is because we haven't figured it, we haven't unpacked it all.
Wow. So much. But yeah, I agree. I think that children should have choices. And I feel like even this question of college or not, that didn't even exist as a paradigm when we were young,
No.
right? Like, of course you go to college.
Yeah, that's just
Like,
that's just an
what do you
expectation.
mean?
Yeah.
But now, like, the more that it becomes apparent that people can be successful even without going to college, I think that opens up a whole new arena that they could like forge a life path that has nothing to do with more schooling.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and that's just one angle, right? So there's choice around partners, there's choice around sexuality, there's choice around all these different things that, I think people have a hard time and have a lot of guilt around saying no or saying yes in some cases because, again, society tends to limit us, and then depending on the family that you've come from or the culture that you've come from, then you have different rules in place because of that, and you're just constantly trying to navigate this thing, and it's hard to find yourself within all of that, right? It's really hard to listen to yourself and hear yourself and understand what's yours and not what is everybody else's, like, words and thoughts.
Yeah, and like I sometimes worry that there's too much choice in this world,
Just too much choice.
right? Like if there was only the decision to make is like what are you going to college for versus now do you want to go to college or not? Then okay, you don't. Now, okay, amongst all of the things that you could do, what's calling to you? Like it's so much more to have to dig. And in the context of sexuality, it's like, oh, well, I could be into he, she, they, like all kinds of stuff.
The thing is, like, I think with all of this choice is also coming change in that things are don't feel as permanent anymore. I think there's more flexibility and fluidity in how we operate and live, and I think that people can be fluid in their gender expression. I think you don't have to just be one thing. Some people feel like they are, right? Just they're very kind of sure in what their preference is. And then some people are like, no, I'm fluid and this is how I feel now. And maybe I've had a different experience that makes me feel like this then. And I think that has to do with choice around career and things like that as well, where it's like, you know, people are evolving into doing so many different things now, right? And nobody is staying at one job for 40 years anymore and retiring from that job. Like, who's doing that? Right. And I think now it seems like there's a way for you to start with one thing and easily grow into a different thing that's parallel or adjacent or, sometimes even very different, but you can bring a skill set with you. So I think there's just also a lot more options that come with the choices. Like, I think, yes, we have so much choice. It's an overwhelming amount of choice. It's an overwhelming how many decisions we have to make a day. I think I did do some research around how many decisions. I can't remember what the number is now. Micro and macro decisions that we make as humans. I think it's over 3,000 or something like that
Wow.
in a day. Micro and macro decisions, and that starts with, like, what are you going to wear? All the little things, and then the bigger life things that we deal with every day. It's an incredible amount of processing that we have to do. Imagine being unsure like a lot of the time within those 3,000 decisions. Like imagine
That feels so exhausting.
it is. And
Just
so
the thought of it is like, oh,
so exhausting. I will say I'm a super indecisive person when it comes to a lot of things. Not in my not you would never know. You got to live with me to know. Ty knows. Like you would never know how indecisive I am. I'm very very indecisive and it drives me crazy.
I sometimes feel that way about myself.
Okay, so you understand.
Yeah, I do understand. I feel like there are times when I have really clear decisions,
Mhm.
right? Like, this is a no, hell yes, fuck no.
Mhm.
Like, those
Mhm.
are my
Mhm.
usual things. And sometimes I just know what the answer
Mhm.
is.
Mhm.
But for a lot of things, it's not always clear.
Yeah.
And in those moments, it's sort of challenging to figure out like, okay, well, what decision what's the best decision here? And sometimes there isn't one, right? Like there isn't a clear best decision.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
could be like make this decision and fall flat on your face, but you learn the best lesson ever,
Mhm.
or make the other decision and get to wherever you need to go and you're like, yay, yes, that worked. Like
But you never really know till you make the
it's
decision, right?
yeah.
And that's the hard part is like it's I guess the fear and the anxiety around making the quote unquote wrong decision, right? Where it's like I mean, the amount of time I spend it's an embarrassing amount of time that I spend comparing products and items for purchase and reading reviews. Like it's an embarrassing amount of time that I spend doing this, okay? Like I will not
What are you like my soul sister? What's
it is like not normal, okay? Like,
yeah.
and then I want to check the reviews on every site because I don't believe this one. And then I'm like, well, let me look at this other version of this. Like, I mean, I drive myself absolutely insane. And so I understand the overwhelm of indecision and I understand the overwhelm. But again, like in certain things, I'm grateful because there's a lot of areas where I'm very certain and very direct and very clear. Mostly for me, it's with shopping and like comparing items and making like personal life decisions. I would say it's more personal life stuff.
I was gonna say, I think my harder decisions are the smaller decisions. Like very often indecisive about clothing,
Okay.
believe it or not.
Okay.
Like, does this work? Do I want to wear this? Is this and I oh my God. Like packing for trips is like
Oh, yeah.
just the worst thing ever because like A, you gotta decide. B, you gotta decide in advance.
And be limited and be committed to
Oh
what you've
my God,
decided on.
it's the
Yeah, it's a lot
worst.
of pressure.
I have given in and stopped trying to like have a small suitcase. I don't care how many days, it's gonna be a big ass fucking suitcase and
So you have options.
because like let's just call it what it is. I'm gonna want to decide between three different things for every single day. And I no longer have a guilt about it. Before it used to be like, oh, but I have to pack everything into this little suitcase.
Because what? Why do you have to?
I think there was a point in my life where I was like, well, I'm not paying extra for the suitcase.
Okay. All
I
right.
just want a little thing that I can
The
stick on top.
carry-on.
Yeah. So like I traveled with my carry-on forever.
Okay, well, we don't have that problem anymore. What's the problem now?
Now it's just like it feels exhausting to be able to think through like what the weather is going to be and what are you going to be doing. So I think that the level of decision and the foresight, especially for like business conferences, I have one that's coming up that I'm like, oh, this is going to be sucky. And I go to the same conference every year, so I feel like I should be better at this by now.
Mm,
Like, I kinda know what it's gonna be like, but it's always the same issue. It's hot as fuck outside, it's cold as
cold
fuck
as fuck
in the room.
inside. Yeah.
You wanna have cute shoes, cute outfit. You gotta be able to change in and out of stuff quickly because there's, like, multiple events in the day, and you have to be, dressed appropriately for all of the events. It's a lot. So that conference is like the worst thing to pack for. Hate it.
Well, you better get started.
No, so what I do is I wait till the very last minute. I will be packing either the night before if it's an early morning flight or the day of if it's a late afternoon flight because I've found that if I don't have a ton of time, then I'm just like, fine, whatever. Just
This is
like
what it's gonna be.
throw it all in there and you're good.
Okay, all right, listen, you found a solution to your problem. That's
You're good. Just throw it all in
that
the bag.
that is good. I like, yeah, I mean, don't know what I would have done with myself if that was my problem. I traveled for, 10 years, I think, 90% of the year, and it was always very much like, yeah, you feel very limited, and so I got very, very well, also, the clothes part doesn't get me, but I'm like that with other things where it's like, just you don't know which way it's going to go. So you're like, you want to be prepared for all of it, or, you just want to know what the outcome is going to be so you can like plan ahead.
Yeah.
But I get it. I think it really is, it can afflict so many different parts of your life. Again, depending on, I think, what your own personal hangups, your own personal, what you perceive as your own weaknesses, the areas that you're insecure. And then if there's like pressure around a thing, right? Like in this conference, for example, you want to present a certain way. I have a trip coming up and I have to pack for 3 weeks. And I'm like, oh, okay. There's so many different elements that have to be thought.
You need 2 suitcases that only
They've already asked me 1 or 2. I was like 2, if not 3, okay?
right. Like, I'll pay for the 3rd
Yeah,
one
like, yeah,
myself.
it is not a problem. It is worth it to have all the shoes that I want to have. But yeah, I think when it comes to those things, it feels like it should be a simple thing, but it speaks to a bigger thing, right? It's about how you perceive yourself and how you want to show up in the world and how you want to be received in the world and all of those things. So, I think a lot of the time when people have a hard time saying no or whatever, it's about how they're being perceived, how they're being judged, if they're being judged. Are they being liked? A lot of people want to be liked by everybody. An impossible task, right? But we do task ourselves with that, trying to get everybody to like us. I mean, I I have a okay time now accepting that. It was actually, it was never really a thought for me. I never really spent a lot of time thinking about people not liking me. It's not like something I worried about. Now I'm more conscious of like, oh, of course there are people who don't like me. Like there's people I don't like. So there's got to be people who don't like me too. And that's okay. I don't think I've ever done anything or acted a way specifically for people to like or not like me. Just for me, it's not really been a thought. And it's not really come up as a thought to consider until other people are like, sort of wanting to work through their desire for people to like them. But I get it. It's a real thing.
It's a very natural evolutionary, like, biological thing because if people didn't like you, you were gonna be excluded from the community or the group, and you were less safe. So it almost is like a survival instinct to be liked.
Yeah, I get
To
it. I
fit in.
completely get it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, there is a conformity that is necessary. There is, it becomes difficult because you look at the world and you're like, okay, well, yeah, I don't agree with a lot of the way that we operate in this world, but it's like there are some things you have to conform to, and there are some standards that you got to live by. And that sometimes means that you're going to have to say no when you want to say yes, or when you're going to have to say yes when you want to
Mhm.
say no. But I think it just becomes like, are you saying it consciously knowing that you are in integrity with yourself, or you're conscious of why, rather than just doing it to appease somebody else?
Do you think men have the same need for acceptance and conformity?
I do actually.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I think they process it differently. I don't think they make it mean as much as we make it. I think we allow it to destroy our entire like character. We're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not thin enough, we're not enough. I think they have the same need for it. I think they don't process it maybe as harshly, like they maybe don't make it mean as much about them, But I think it just goes back to like how we were talking about earlier, just how we're conditioned as boys and girls growing up, right? Like girls are just naturally exposed to way more reason to be insecure, right, than boys.
It's funny. I was almost coming to the conclusion that men are not the same
Like they don't need it.
for conformity in their need for acceptance. And maybe this is my filter because my husband's unique. But in society, men don't relate to safety the same way that
No, they do not.
female-bodied people do. And they don't constantly walk around thinking, "Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe?" And we may not be doing this on a conscious level, but women are doing that
For sure.
2,000 times a day, right? Probably more than that. And uh, I don't, if you don't relate to your safety in that way, and you don't have I'm safer in a group, I'm safer with more numbers, and then hence you don't have the same level of need for acceptance, right? They could, and this is not all men, but potentially like I can be out here on my own and I have no need to fit into anything because I don't give two shits. Because inherently I'm safe.
I get it. I definitely think that there probably is more ability for men to stand apart and be, but then I think about things like cults or, you know, particular religious groups or just particular groups. There are usually equal numbers of men and women in those groups.
Really?
Yeah. I watch them all. I like all of those. Ty is
It's a cult movie.
the cult shit, all the cults and all the religions and all the groups and all the things.
And I think maybe you're right. Like even men have a need for
It's a need for belonging, right? Like there's still a need for belonging. I think again how they because they're looking for less safety and there's less uh there are less reasons for them to feel insecure in a lot of spaces and a lot like with themselves, with other people, then maybe it is easier for them to stand apart where we are looking more for that. But I think I could be wrong, but I think biologically we all have the same need for belonging and for being part of a group and for attachment and things like that, right? Uh, I think we can the way we're conditioned then and the way we're socialized, you know, has a lot to do with then how we end up expressing that over time. But yeah, I think it's much easier for men to be okay independently and feel secure. And I think that society is set up for men to feel safe in pretty much every space, especially white men. And I think that Black men don't have that same experience. So, you know, I think there is more need for group in with Black men. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that at all. 0%. Yeah, like yeah, it would be interesting to get a male perspective on that because I think will also depend on their own particular experience, right? And what kind of world they were raised in. And because I will say, like, I know a lot of men who do have, you know, a friend group, but I know a lot of men who don't have like a big friend group who kind of move through the world a little bit more independently and don't um have the, I don't know, quote unquote need. I don't know if it's really like or just haven't connected in the same way and seem okay. I don't know, but I'm sure there are women like that too. I just don't find that I know that many women who are because the women that I meet who don't have connections on that level feel lonely about it. They feel like there's something missing. Whereas I don't think men report that something is missing for them when they don't have that.
I think there's this movement on social media of men acknowledging that they have a need, they feel alone, they feel like lonely or need for more connection is being expressed by some people, but I think that there are likely men that could care less. and it wouldn't be, I think it would be not as weird to find men that are in that group of people that are like, I'll connect with people when I do and when I don't, whatever. Like, it's not on my brain. I could care less, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, men like that, I think, certainly don't have a hard time saying no, and don't have guilt around it or
right.
feel shame around it. I think
Right.
men like that can easily assert themselves and feel very valid in their opinions. And I think honestly, sometimes men are like that to a fault, where they are in a position and don't want to budge from that position and feel so self-righteous in that position, right? So I think it can go very extreme sometimes with men where it's like, no, my yes is my yes and this is just the way it is. And they're resistant to seeing other ways or perspectives, or where they're too sure in their stance and too sure, overly confident
And
in their
is that,
opinion.
I don't truly, I know there's this movement of talking about narcissism, but is that like the edge of where people start potentially like
Maybe. I mean,
being narcissistic?
yeah, I think that's like a mild sort of like one-up position. It's just like a posturing, right, of like superiority. And I don't know that it always comes with narcissism, but there is, I think, sometimes a more tendency, and again, generalization. You guys should know by now we speak generally. Like it's hard to always be like so politically correct, right? I think there is a overall superiority that men often exhibit, especially if they. So when you talk about like coming up from that one up sort of position, it usually comes from two places. One of like severe neglect and abandonment, where you had to sort of use that as your own survival, right? You had to like bolster yourself up overconfidently, or where it was modeled for you, where you saw it modeled over and over again, right? The superiority and the posturing and so on. So, and there's other places it comes from, but usually from those two places. So I think that, is just more inherent in a person that was born male and presents and moves in the world as a male than women. I think just biologically, I think that's, and then the conditioning as well. So
Yeah. So I have a question. If someone were listening to this, let's suppose it's a woman who is like, dang, I really gotta like get better about saying no, what would your advice be to them?
understand why you're saying yes first, right? Like, what is it about the yes that feels like you're obligated or compelled to do, right? Like, what do you feel like you're going to be missing, or what do you perceive as the consequence, or what are you afraid of happening if you say
If you were to not say no,
if you were not to say if you were not to say no, right? So like I think understanding why your response is what it is important, because we default to responses, right? We think we're supposed to. It's like a should, but we don't know why we should, and we don't explore that. Like why am I feeling inclined to do this thing? And then understanding like what is the consequence of the other thing, right? And then you have to weigh that and decide what's best for you. And a lot of times I think people in doing that work to identify why they feel a way about it, they're like, oh shit, like why should I feel a way about this? This is like ridiculous. Yeah.
that's awesome advice.
Well, I mean, I hope it's helpful because it does work though. It does work in that, it makes you think beyond the response, beyond the default, right? It makes you understand, sort of what trap you're consistently falling into, because you will recognize that there's a pattern, right? There's some fear, some consequence you're afraid of, or some response that you don't want or do want or whatever that, usually comes with this.
Yeah. I think my advice would be to tune into your intuition and to build that muscle, because I do think it's a muscle, and like really following your intuition and then see what happens. And then you're like, oh, that was really good. Great. Maybe I'll follow it again. And maybe
What if it doesn't work out? Like you were saying
yeah.
earlier.
And like that so again, I default to intuition. So my mode for the last couple of years has been great. So I'm going to like take a break from all of it. I'm just going to like filter out the things that I said yes to that maybe were aligned and what I needed to do, and the things that I said yes to that weren't aligned and I shouldn't have said yes to. Just like filter it all away, go back to the basics, and then start rebuilding that muscle. Because I feel like it was a break in trust with my higher self, right? And there's like, in reality, there's no reason to feel that way. It's like I still got lessons out of it.
Yeah. Well, you were reminded that, yeah, that you had to lean back in.
Yeah, and like the bad decisions may not have um they probably weren't as bad as I am making them out to be. I think the worst, like the biggest loss was money, right? And in the grand scheme of things, money ain't everything. So it's like, okay, well, I lost a couple tens of thousands.
Yep.
It's not, it wasn't small amounts of money. It was a good chunk of money. I made investments in some companies that I shouldn't have, that basically bankrupted. And now they're in lawsuits. And I'm like, you guys promised us a lifetime thing that you are no longer delivering on. Like,
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's rough.
so stuff like that is just like, it was bad moves. But in retrospect, I'm like, absolutely, I can see why I made that decision. I can see, and what I'm getting to see now is the inner workings of why that even existed, right? Like, how did this company get so popular that hundreds of us bought this, like, essentially like a scam to a certain extent, that they were going to deliver on this thing for lifetime, that they are not, like, you can't be a lifetime if you are no longer a company, right? Like, you can't give someone a lifetime of service if you need to shut down. So I can, like, as I'm like integrating more of this, I can start to see like what the lesson is behind the veil. And like, and I can see why I made that decision. Like, it came from almost a cockiness of in business, right? Like, I got this, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna sign up for this new thing, right? Instead of like really evaluating and digging deeper. Being like, wait, if you're so famous, why the fuck don't you have following on social media? Like, you're not on there.
Yeah, because we see what we want to see, right? And we see things that are going to serve our story that we've crafted in our own head. And I think, that's the lesson, right? And that's the lesson. And yeah, listen, if you are saying no and you mean yes, or saying yes and you mean no, there's going to be a consequence. It's about really finding the lesson in the consequence and then trying not to repeat that thing again, right?
Absolutely. So like, I took it kind of hard. I've been like a little bit sad about it, but like the big perspective is I didn't lose that much, right? I can make it all back. And I learned some lessons, and this, like, still, I want to rebuild that trust in myself. So the way to do that is still like allow the small decisions to still be guided by intuition, and keep like, did that work? Did that not work? Did I listen to my intuition? Did I not listen to my intuition? And keep following that, even though there was a, a kind of a break in that trust. And
That's such an important lesson of forgiving yourself too, right? And like not shaming yourself into more distrust and less belief in yourself, right? Because that could go the other way, in that it would be easy to be so hard on yourself and allow your inner critic and allow that part of yourself that wants to prove yourself wrong, because we all have that part, right? That wants to give in to your insecurities. It would be easy to lean into that, right? In a situation like that. So it's, those moments, I think, where we really can choose to identify, what's causing us to say yes, causing us to say no, and make different choices.
Absolutely. I love it.
All right. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for hanging with us.
Love it.
Bye.